Picture this. You're sitting on your couch, right? You're watching the evening news, and a devastating earthquake or a massive tsunami or maybe a sudden war has just completely shattered a developing nation.
Yeah, we've all seen those broadcasts. It's just horrific.
Right. It's collapsed buildings, crying families, just pure chaos. And almost immediately, I mean, before the dust has even settled, your social media feeds start filling up.
Right, with those urgent pleas.
Exactly. Heart-wrenching posts saying, adopt the orphans, save a child's life, bring them home.
And, I mean, it's an incredibly powerful call to action. It taps directly into our deepest human instincts. When we see a kid in danger, our biological wiring just screams at us to do something.
Yeah, and it feels like this beautiful, purely altruistic miracle. You look at this broken world and you think, well, I can't fix the earthquake, but I can fix this for one person. I can rescue a child.
It's a very comforting thought. But
what if this seemingly sacred humanitarian rescue is actually the front line of a billion-dollar global supply chain?
Yeah, that's the real question.
What if the orphan crisis we've all been sold, the one that tugs at our wallets and our hearts, is actually just a carefully constructed illusion?
It's a huge paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the core, unsettling reality we are unpacking today.
Yes, we are doing a deep dive into a deeply investigated, frankly shocking book called The Child Catchers. It's by veteran investigative journalist Kathryn Joyce.
And our mission today is to pull back the curtain on the entire global adoption industry.
I have to admit, as I was going through these sources, my fundamental understanding of charity was it was completely turned upside down.
It's a tough pill to swallow. We're going to objectively explore how massive Western wealth, intense religious fervor, and systemic poverty all collide.
And how that collision creates a global market where vulnerable children are, in far too many cases, honestly harvested to meet a demand rather than rescued from a crisis.
Right. The source material forces us to look past the heartwarming airport arrival photos, the balloons, the weeping parents.
The happy stuff.
Exactly. And instead, we have to examine the cold, hard mechanics of an industry. We'll be looking at how demand in the West fundamentally alters the supply of adoptable children in the developing world.
And often at a terrible, irreversible cost to the birth families.
Yeah.
So to you, our listener, consider this your warning. Prepare to have some deeply held assumptions totally challenged today.
Definitely.
I want to start by taking us back to a moment that I'm sure many of you remember vividly. January 2010, a catastrophic 7.0 magnitude earthquake hits Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Hundreds of thousands of people killed.
Millions left instantly homeless. Now, here is where the narrative we all saw on TV violently clashes with the reality on the ground. Think about this. Why did heavily armed U.S. military forces block adult Haitian refugees from fleeing the rubble, while simultaneously rolling out the red carpet for Haitian babies?
It is the central glaring paradox of that entire disaster response.
It's crazy.
It really is. If we look at the macro level, the U.S. response was deeply bifurcated. On one hand, you had Operation Vigilant Sentry.
Right.
This was a military and homeland security strategy that strictly enforced a blockade. U.S. Coast Guard vessels were deployed in the waters around Haiti to ensure that desperate Haitian adults did not flee by boat.
Wait, they literally blocked them?
Yes. They broadcast messages from airplanes flying over the destruction, telling Haitians, do not come to the U.S., you will be intercepted and sent back.
That is just astounding to me. You have adults literally trapped in a toxic, rubble-filled disaster zone facing cholera outbreaks and starvation, and the official message is, stay put, we're keeping you fenced in.
Exactly. But then, almost overnight, the U.S. media narrative pivots entirely.
Right, the media shifted from the tragedy to this called silver lining.
Yes, the focus shifted intensely to American parents getting their adopted Haitian children expedited. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security rolled out a special humanitarian parole policy.
And what did that actually do?
It was a mechanism designed specifically to bypass the normal, lengthy, legally required background checks and visa processes. The goal was to quickly fly over 1,150 Haitian children directly into the United States.
I remember watching cable news during this. You had reporters standing on tarmac, totally breathless, narrating these incredible human moments as wealthy Americans chartered private planes to just swoop in and carry babies out.
It looked like a Hollywood movie.
It really did. But let me just apply some basic logic here for a second. In a disaster zone, With rubble everywhere and communication lines completely severed, how do you even know a child is actually an orphan?
That is the crucial question.
Right, because the parents could just be in a makeshift hospital tent 3 miles away.
Hmm.
Isn't the absolute most fundamental rule of disaster response to reunite families?
In a functioning humanitarian framework, yes. Family tracing and reunification is the absolute gold standard, always.
That didn't happen here.
No. What took over in Haiti was a frantic rescue-first mentality. The prevailing sentiment among the adoption agencies and the eager parents was, these kids are in danger, get them on a plane now, the paperwork can wait.
Everybody wins, right?
That was the idea. But as you just pointed out, when you bypass the paperwork in a chaotic disaster zone, you bypass the only safeguards designed to figure out if a child actually needs a new family.
You bypass the safeguard that literally asks, hey, did this baby have a mother looking for them right now?
Exactly. And during this rush, adoption advocates and the media started throwing around staggering, completely unfounded numbers to justify this airlift.
Like what kind of numbers?
They claimed there were anywhere from 400,000 to 1 million orphans newly created by the earthquake.
1 million orphans? Are you kidding me? That's almost 1/10 of Haiti's entire population at the time.
It defies basic demographic reality. It was a glaring statistical lie. UNICEF quickly had to step in and try to calm the frenzy.
What did UNICEF say?
They clarified that the real number of parentless children was closer to 50,000, and most of those were already being absorbed by their extended family networks.
But I'm guessing the bloated numbers had already done their damage.
They had. They fueled a frantic, vigilante-style rescue mission. And that brings us to one of the most unbelievable stories in the book.
Oh man, the Laura Silsby case.
Yes, the infamous case of Laura Silsby and the New Life Children's Refuge.
Listener, this story is the ultimate slap in the face. I literally read this part of the book 3 times just to make sure I was understanding it right. You have this woman, Laura Silsby from Idaho. She runs an evangelical orphan ministry.
Right.
She gathers up a team of 10 missionaries. They fly down to the Dominican Republic, which shares an island with Haiti. They rent a hotel, charter a bus, and literally plan to drive into the Haitian disaster zone to, quote, gather 100 orphans from the streets.
Just drive around and load kids onto a bus.
It's wild.
The audacity is staggering. They had no official paperwork, no coordination with the Haitian government, no child welfare experts on their team at all.
And they ended up getting arrested, right?
They did. They were arrested at the Dominican border trying to smuggle 33 Haitian children out of the country.
The media at the time dubbed it kidnapping for Jesus. Silsby and her team were outraged. They went on camera claiming they were just trying to save starving, parentless earthquake victims.
They framed themselves as martyrs, like they were being persecuted for doing God's work in a corrupt country.
But here is the devastating truth that emerged during the investigation. Every single one of those 33 children had living parents.
Every single one.
How does that even happen?
Well, what the missionaries had actually done was drive to rural villages. And keep in mind, some of these villages were miles away from the epicenter and barely damaged by the earthquake.
Wow.
And they convinced desperate, impoverished parents to hand over their kids.
But how do you even convince a parent to do that? I mean, just hand over your child to a stranger on a bus.
By playing on their deep poverty and making promises they couldn't keep. They told the parents that their children would receive a free education, 3 meals a day, safety, and a better life across the border at a Christian facility.
So they lied to them.
The parents absolutely did not understand they were giving their children up for permanent international adoption, where their names would be changed and they would never see them again. The parents thought they were sending them to a temporary, high-quality boarding school.
So they didn't rescue orphans at all. They actively separated intact families. And the kicker for me is Silsby's reaction when she found out.
It's very telling.
When the authorities finally informed her that these children had parents, that they weren't orphans, she didn't express relief. You'd think she'd say, well, thank God their families are alive.
But she didn't.
No. The book notes she actually cried because she couldn't take the children with her. The goal wasn't family preservation. The goal was acquisition.
And the source text makes a crucial point here. This vigilantism wasn't just one rogue Idaho group making a mistake. It was the natural endpoint of a massive, systemic issue that pervades the entire industry.
Which is what?
The willful, strategic redefinition of the word orphan.
Oh, man. Which is a perfect segue into a statistic that I guarantee you, the listener, have encountered.
Yes, it's everywhere.
You've probably seen this number printed on church flyers, or stamped on those silicone charity wristbands, or in slick fundraising videos. 143 million orphans worldwide.
Some advocacy groups even inflate it to 210 million.
Yeah, and when you hear that, you picture 143 million toddlers sitting in cribs, utterly alone in the world, just waiting for a Westerner to come adopt them.
It is an incredibly effective marketing tool. It suggests this massive global population of parentless children, framing international adoption not just as a nice option, but as an urgent moral necessity.
A crisis that must be solved.
Exactly. But what is truly fascinating and deeply troubling is that the number is fundamentally misunderstood and often deliberately misrepresented by agencies who know better.
Okay, I need you to break this down, because when I realized the math behind this, I felt completely manipulated. Where does the 143 million number even come from?
It comes from official United Nations and USAID data, but those organizations do not use the word orphan in the way you and I use it in everyday English.
What do they mean by it then?
That 143 million figure represents orphan and vulnerable children. Crucially, the UN defines a single orphan as a child who has lost one parent.
Wait, let me stop you. Hold on. So if a child's father dies of illness, or maybe in a car accident, but that child is living happily at home with their mother, their siblings, going to school, they're counted as an orphan in that massive statistic.
Yes, exactly. The vast majority of that 143 million are children who live perfectly safely with their surviving mother or father, or they have been seamlessly taken in by their grandparents, aunts, or extended family networks.
So the idea that there are 143 million parentless kids waiting to be adopted is just a complete fabrication.
It completely distorts reality to manufacture demand. If you dig into the actual data, only about 10% of that massive figure, around 17.8 million, are double orphans who have lost both parents.
That's still a big number, but nowhere near 140 million.
Right. And even within that smaller, tragic group of double orphans, the overwhelming majority are cared for by extended family or their local communities. They are not waiting in institutions for foreign rescue.
Okay, but wait. We see the photos. We see the orphanages filled with kids. What about the children actually living in institutions? Because they clearly exist.
This is where the deception becomes truly institutionalized. Global studies, including extensive research by Save the Children, found something shocking. Roughly 80% of children living in orphanages worldwide have at least one living parent or family member.
80%. Okay, I have to push back here. If 80% of these kids have families, why on earth are they living in an orphanage? Why would a parent put their child in an institution if they are still alive?
Because of poverty. Pure, grinding poverty.
I mean, I guess that makes sense, but still.
In many developing nations, the concept of an orphanage operates very differently than we imagine in the West. They often function as free boarding schools for the ultra-poor.
Ah, like what the Haitian parents thought Silsby was offering.
Precisely. Parents who cannot afford food, medical care, or school fees will temporarily place their child in an orphanage so the child can simply survive and get an education.
So they don't see it as giving the child up forever.
Not at all. The parents visit them, they bring them home for holidays, they fully plan to take them back permanently when they are older or when the family's financial situation stabilizes. They are absolutely not abandoning them for Western adoption.
But to a Westerner, conditioned by that fake 143 million statistic, a child sitting in an orphanage automatically equals an adoptable orphan.
Exactly. And this is where the economics come into play. And it is chilling.
Let's talk about the money, because this is wild. We're talking about operating in countries where the average person might live on less than $2 a day. Right? But let's look at the other side of the transaction. What is the fee for an American family to adopt internationally?
It is astronomical. An international adoption can easily range from $10,000 to $25,000, and sometimes up to $60,000 when you factor in all the agency fees, legal costs, and required donations.
$60,000. Let's follow the money here. In a country where 80% of the population lives on $2 a day, injecting a $20,000 transaction for a single child creates an unbelievable economic distortion.
It warps everything.
The book gives this stark example from Ethiopia. During the height of the Ethiopian adoption boom, local facilitators, and these guys were literally called child finders, which is creepy enough, where we're being paid a flat fee by Western agencies for every adoptable child they could find.
And that fee could be as high as $5,000 per child.
Okay, let's put that $5,000 in perspective. In Ethiopia at that time, $5,000 was roughly equivalent to 10 years of an average person's salary.
10 years.
Let me just use an analogy here. It is basically a bounty system. If you offer a 10-year salary as a reward for finding an orphan, you aren't going to solve an orphan crisis. You are going to incentivize people to artificially manufacture orphans to claim the reward.
That is precisely the mechanism of the supply chain. You introduce a massive financial incentive to produce a specific product, in this case, an adoptable child.
So how does a child finder earn their 10-year salary?
They don't wait for orphans to appear. They go deep into rural poverty zones. They target the most vulnerable people in the society, often single mothers, widows, or families who have just lost a crop.
And they use intense coercion.
Yes, they use the exact same tactics Laura Silsby used. They offer false promises of Western education. They might tell a widow, let us take your child to America for schooling. They will send you money back.
And the mother thinks she's doing what's best for her kid.
Sometimes it's outright deception, too. Getting illiterate parents to put a thumbprint on relinquishment papers they literally cannot read.
That's horrifying.
The child is then funneled into an orphanage. Their paperwork is systematically laundered, maybe their name is changed, or a fake death certificate is drawn up for the parents to make them look like a quote-unquote true orphan on paper.
And then they are matched with a wealthy Western family, a family who's paying $30,000, $40,000, thinking they are doing a beautiful, noble thing, completely unaware that their money basically funded the malicious separation of a family.
The author, Kathryn Joyce, quotes a UN official who summarized this horrific dynamic perfectly. They said, if you build an orphanage, it will be filled with kids.
Wow. Let that sink in.
The mere presence of Western adoption agencies and freshly built, well-funded orphanages creates a vacuum. It acts as an economic magnet that actively pulls children away from their biological families.
So the supply is being artificially stimulated by the money. But this shifts our focus to the demand side of the equation. Where is all this insatiable demand for international adoption coming from?
This brings us to a fascinating and complex shift in American culture.
Now, a quick disclaimer to you listening. As we dive into this next part, we are looking at this strictly objectively based on the documented history in the source text. We are not taking sides, we are not here to mock anyone's religious beliefs, and we're not debating theology.
Right. We are simply reporting on how a specific, highly organized religious movement actively reshaped a multi-billion-dollar global market.
Exactly. So how did this shift happen?
It's a crucial, undeniable piece of the puzzle. Historically, for a long time, international adoption was largely a secular, somewhat quiet path, primarily utilized by infertile couples looking to build a family. It was a private matter.
Right.
But in the early 2000s, it transformed radically. Driven by influential megachurches like Rick Warren's Saddleback Church and massive denominations like the Southern Baptist Convention, adoption became a highly organized, highly publicized spiritual warfare campaign.
And just to be clear,
Yeah.
the Southern Baptist Convention alone has over 16 million members. When an organization that size pivots, the earth moves. The text describes how they adopted resolutions, formally defining adoption, not just as family building, but as an orphan theology. They point to a specific Bible verse, James 1.27, which mandates believers to care for orphans and widows in their distress.
Yes, the theological shift is profound. It changes the entire psychological motivation for adopting. Adoption is framed as a literal command from God.
Wow.
Furthermore, it is promoted as a highly effective way to fulfill the Great Commission, the Christian directive to evangelize the world.
So it becomes a missionary tool.
Exactly. The logic taught from the pulpit is that by adopting a child from a non-Christian or developing nation, you are literally saving them twice. You rescue their physical body from the ravages of poverty, and you rescue their soul by raising them in a Christian home.
You are literally snatching a soul away from Satan.
That's how it's framed, yes.
It's pitched as the ultimate unassailable moral victory. And the enthusiasm generated by this messaging is just static.
It went completely viral in these communities.
The book details how you had single congregations adopting dozens, sometimes hundreds of children. It became a marker of extreme faith.
And to illustrate how this religious fervor operates on the ground and how it can sometimes completely detach from the actual needs of children, the author details the story of Pastor Tom Benz.
Right, the guy with the Bridgestone Retreat Center in Alabama.
Exactly. Pastor Benz is a perfect case study of this mindset. He ran a ministry that initially focused on airlifting Ukrainian orphans to his camp in Alabama for short-term summer or Christmas stays.
And the goal there was adoption, right?
Yes, with the explicit hope that local families would meet these older kids and adopt them. But when the 2010 Haiti earthquake hit, Benz abruptly pivoted his entire operation.
Because Haiti was the hot new crisis.
It was all over the news. So he announced sweeping plans to airlift up to 150 Haitian orphans to his Alabama retreat center instead.
He literally just switched out the country like he was changing the channel. He raised funds, got huge teams of volunteers to renovate his camp, and built up this massive, dramatic expectation in his community that he was going to funnel Haitian kids into Alabama for mass adoption.
He did, but because he was essentially trying to bypass the official, albeit slow, international adoption channels, his plans continually hit legal brick walls.
Which makes sense, especially after the whole Laura Silsby mess.
Right. The Haitian government was clamping down hard, so Benz kept downgrading the number from 150 kids to 50 to 10.
And what happened when he realized he couldn't get any Haitian kids?
When the legal hurdles in Haiti proved insurmountable, he didn't redirect his funds to help rebuild Haitian schools or support Haitian families. He just quietly dropped Haiti entirely. He seamlessly pivoted back to Ukraine, bringing a group of Ukrainian kids over for Christmas instead.
It's mind-boggling. It's like he just needed an orphan, any orphan, from anywhere, to fulfill the ministry's goal and justify the donations. It didn't matter what the specific needs of the specific country were. It was about the act of rescuing, not the reality of the child.
This raises an incredibly important question about the danger of this specific brand of religious idealism.
How so?
When adoption is viewed not as a complex, trauma-filled legal and social process, but as a divine, unquestionable mandate to save souls, the ethical guardrails completely fall off.
Oh, I see.
Foreign laws, international regulations like UNICEF's child protection protocols are no longer seen as vital safeguards against child trafficking.
Right. If you believe God told you to adopt a child, then a foreign social worker telling you to wait is just an obstacle.
Exactly. They are viewed as bureaucratic annoyances, or even worse, as the literal work of the devil trying to stop God's divine plan.
So, if a government agency says, hey, wait, let's make sure this child doesn't have an aunt or a grandmother who can take care of them before we put them on a plane, the advocates just say, you are leaving children to suffer and die in the name of red tape.
Precisely. The sense of absolute moral certainty blinds them to the collateral damage they might be causing. If your goal is ultimate spiritual salvation, you can justify almost any earthly shortcut to get there.
Now you, the listener, might be sitting there thinking, wow, this is terrible, the coercion, the bounty systems, the bypassing of laws. But this is only happening because these are desperate, war-torn countries with weak governments and desperate poverty, right?
That's what a lot of people assume.
Well, prepare for another massive slap in the face. Because the blueprint for this entire machinery of coercive adoption, the psychological manipulation tactics, they weren't invented in Ethiopia or Haiti.
Oh, they were not.
They were perfected right here in the United States.
To understand the modern domestic adoption industry in America, we have to look back at a dark, largely swept under the rug chapter of our own history. What sociologists and historians call the baby scoop era.
I had never even heard that term before reading this.
It's shocking how little it's discussed. This era lasted from roughly 1945 to 1972, essentially the post-World War II boom, right up until Roe v. Wade legalized abortion.
And what happened during that time?
During this window, an estimated 1.5 million to 10 million American single mothers were systematically pressured, coerced, and forced into surrendering their babies to wealthy, infertile, married couples.
10 million women. I had always pictured the 50s as this idyllic, Leave It to Beaver era. But the details from the baby scoop era are just chilling.
Very chilling.
You had these women, often teenagers, but sometimes women in their 20s, who got pregnant out of wedlock. And at the time, an out-of-wedlock pregnancy wasn't just a scandal. Social workers and psychiatrists actively classified it as a pathology.
They deemed unwed motherhood a sign of mental defect, neurosis, or extreme delinquency that required treatment.
And the treatment was stripping them of their child.
The coercion was brutal, systemic, and entirely unapologetic. These women were sent away to secretive maternity homes run by charities or religious organizations.
The text compares the conditions in these homes to prisons.
They essentially were. The women were often hidden from society, given fake names, and forbidden from contacting their friends or the fathers of their children. They were forced to work as unpaid domestics to, quote-unquote, pay for their keep.
And the medical abuse during labor, oh my God. The book describes women being isolated during childbirth, deliberately denied pain medication as a form of punishment for their sins.
Or conversely, pumped full of heavy sedatives, what they called twilight sleep, so they couldn't even remember the birth.
And while they were still drugged or weeping and recovering from labor, social workers would literally stand over their hospital beds, pressuring them to sign relinquishment papers.
They were told, if you truly love this baby, you will give it to a married couple who can provide for it. If you keep it, you will ruin its life.
That is just evil.
They were assured, you'll forget about this baby, you'll go on, get married, and live a normal life. But of course, the book interviews women from this era, and they suffered profound, lifelong trauma.
Severe PTSD, depression, unresolved grief.
It was the systematic, industrialized harvesting of infants to meet the soaring post-war demand of infertile couples.
Billions of women. But here's where it connects to the present day. That specific era ended in the 70s, but the infrastructure didn't disappear. It just evolved.
It did. The modern-day equivalent of those secretive maternity homes is the Crisis Pregnancy Center, or CPC network.
Yes. Today, there are over 4,000 crisis pregnancy centers operating in the United States. They actually far outnumber actual abortion clinics.
They are primarily faith-based, anti-abortion organizations. Their primary public-facing goal is to convince pregnant women not to have abortions.
Which, okay, that's their stated goal. But the hidden secondary goal of many of these centers, which are often heavily subsidized by federal funding, is to funnel these vulnerable women directly into the domestic adoption industry.
We should note, congressional reports have found that a vast majority of these federally funded centers deliberately provide women with false or misleading medical information.
Right. They will tell a terrified 19-year-old that abortion causes breast cancer, or that it leads to post-abortion suicide syndrome. Or they will intentionally misread ultrasounds to delay the woman past the legal limit for an abortion.
So they trap them into carrying the pregnancy.
Exactly. But in the late 90s, the adoption industry ran into a massive problem. Once these single mothers decided to carry to term, almost none of them actually wanted to give up their babies. If they were having the baby, they wanted to parent.
Which is the natural human instinct. But this was a crisis for the supply side of the adoption market. So the industry did what any multi-billion-dollar industry does.
They hired marketers.
In 2000, a conservative adoption advocacy group released an extensive market research report called The Missing Piece.
The author of The Child Catchers describes this document essentially as the CPC Bible.
It is a masterclass in psychological manipulation.
The findings in The Missing Piece are just wow. The researchers found that women resisted adoption because they felt it was an abandonment of their child. The mother's natural instinct was to protect and keep her baby.
So the report trained CPC counselors to completely invert the narrative. They were given specific scripts to reframe the concept of motherhood entirely.
They trained counselors to frame a single, low-income mother keeping her baby as an act of profound selfishness and immaturity.
They would look a young woman in the eye and say, are you really going to subject this child to a life of poverty in a studio apartment? Is that what a good mother would do?
And conversely, they framed surrendering the baby to a wealthier, married, Christian couple as a heroic, loving, and Christ-like sacrifice. They literally weaponized a mother's deep biological love for her child to convince her she wasn't good enough to raise it.
It is a profound, calculated level of moral coercion.
The book shares a heartbreaking story of a 19-year-old girl named Ray Ann.
Yes, Ray Ann's story perfectly illustrates this.
She goes to a faith-based maternity agency seeking help to buy diapers and a crib. She just needs a little bit of help. Instead, she is isolated, surrounded by counselors pushing glossy brochures of wealthy couples with golden retrievers and big backyards.
They break her down psychologically. Within 24 hours of giving birth, while still heavily medicated from an epidural, she's pressured into signing an irrevocable consent form.
A mother who had every intention of raising her child is stripped of her rights through sheer psychological warfare.
It happens every day.
But wait, let me push back here because I think a lot of listeners are having this exact thought. Isn't this all fixed now with open adoptions?
That's a very common misconception.
Like back in the baby scoop era, it was closed, the records were sealed, and it was a giant secret. But today, doesn't the industry pride itself on open adoption? Birth mothers get to see their kids grow up, they get photos, they get to visit on birthdays.
This is one of the most heartbreaking, deceptive realities of the modern domestic system. Today, around 95% of domestic infant adoptions are pitched as open adoptions.
Because it sounds better.
Exactly. The idea of open adoption is incredibly popular because it sanitizes the transaction. It makes the adoptive parents and the agencies feel better, and it comforts the birth mother. But the legal reality.
That's the legal reality.
Open adoption is very frequently used as a manipulative marketing tool, a closer to get a hesitant, weeping mother to finally sign the irreversible relinquishment papers.
Wait, a marketing tool? You mean they promise her she'll see the kid just to get the signature?
Yes, because in the vast majority of U.S. states, open adoption agreements are legally unenforceable.
Let me make sure I'm hearing this right, because it sounds like a literal scam. An agency and an adoptive couple can promise a mother, in writing, on a signed contract, you will get pictures every month, you can visit every Christmas, and the mother signs away her child based on that specific promise. And then what?
The adoptive parents can completely sever all contact the moment the ink is dry, and they frequently do.
Seriously?
Yes. Once the final adoption decree is issued, they might decide the birth mother's presence is confusing to the child, or they just don't want to deal with her anymore. They change their phone numbers, they move, they block the birth mother on social media.
And she can't do anything about it.
Because the adoption decree has legally, permanently terminated all of the birth mother's parental rights. She has absolutely no legal recourse. She can't take them to court to enforce the visits. The open aspect was just a phantom promise to secure the inventory.
That is just devastating. It's a zero-sum game where 100% of the power rests with the adoptive parents and the agencies, and the biological mother is left with nothing but grief.
And speaking of power, the book highlights how agencies actively exploit state-level legal loopholes to systematically strip rights away from biological parents, especially fathers.
Right. Let's talk about the Utah loophole, which is famous in the industry.
Utah has essentially become a baby warehouse hub for the domestic adoption industry.
Why Utah?
Precisely because its state laws are incredibly favorable to agencies and highly punitive to biological parents. For example, under Utah law, a mother can sign an irrevocable consent to adoption just 24 hours after giving birth.
Think about the physiological reality of that. 24 hours postpartum, you are exhausted, your hormones are crashing, you are possibly medicated from surgery, and you can sign away your child forever with zero grace period to change your mind later.
It's designed to lock the decision in while she's most vulnerable.
But what about the fathers? Because if a woman wants to give up a child, doesn't the biological father have to consent?
That is where the law becomes truly aggressive. Utah, like several other states, uses what is called a putative father registry.
What is that?
If an unmarried man gets a woman pregnant, he does not automatically have rights to that child. In Utah, an out-of-state biological father can have his parental rights completely terminated without his knowledge if he doesn't register with the state's putative father registry within an incredibly short window.
How short?
Usually within 20 to 30 days of the child's birth, or sometimes even before the child is born.
Wait, how would a guy in Ohio know he has to file legal paperwork in Utah?
He wouldn't.
That's...
And agencies know this. Agencies will literally fly pregnant women from across the country to Utah, put them up in an apartment to give birth, specifically to exploit this jurisdictional trap.
To transport the mother, to cut the father out.
Exactly. They do it to cut an unsupportive or even a loving but unaware boyfriend out of the picture entirely. By the time the father realizes his girlfriend had the baby and gave it up, his 20-day window has expired and his child is gone forever.
A father loses his flesh and blood just because his pregnant girlfriend took a flight to Salt Lake City and he didn't know he had to file obscure paperwork in a state he doesn't even live in. It's astonishing.
It is entirely by design.
So we've seen how ruthless and legally manipulative the domestic market can be. Let's zoom back out to the international stage. Because if this is how they treat American citizens with constitutional rights, what happens overseas?
It's even more unchecked overseas.
Right. What happens when a foreign country finally catches on to this corruption, looks at the bounty systems and the coercion, and shuts its doors? Do the agencies pack it in and admit they were wrong?
Not at all. The global adoption industry operates exactly like a fluid, unregulated capital market.
How so?
When the regulatory environment gets too strict or the fraud becomes too public in one country, the capital, the agencies, the facilitators, the millions of dollars simply flows to the next point of least resistance.
The geographic drift of this industry is so obvious when you look at the timeline. The book traces it perfectly. For a long time, Guatemala was the absolute hotspot. It was the Wild West of adoption.
At its peak, the statistics are mind-numbing. Guatemala was sending 1 out of every 100 babies born in the entire country to the United States for adoption.
Let that statistic sink in for a moment. 1% of a sovereign nation's entire birth rate was being exported as commodities.
It was a massive, highly lucrative industry, completely infiltrated by organized crime. It was fueled by extreme document fraud, women being paid to breed, and even outright kidnapping of infants from hospitals.
And eventually it caught up with them.
Finally, in 2008, the fraud became too glaring for the international community to ignore, and Guatemala officially shut its doors to international adoption.
So millions of dollars in agency revenue are suddenly cut off. What happens next? Literally overnight, the entire apparatus shifts to Africa. Suddenly, Ethiopia miraculously discovers a brand new, unprecedented orphan crisis.
The numbers perfectly map the shift. In 1997, Ethiopia sent exactly 82 children to the U.S. It wasn't a major hub. But by 2010, right after Guatemala closed, that number skyrocketed to over 2,500 children a year, accounting for 25% of all U.S. international adoptions.
Agencies that had literally been banned for unethical behavior in other countries simply bought plane tickets and set up shop in Addis Ababa.
And that is exactly when we saw the explosion of those child finders we talked about earlier, earning 10 years' salary for harvesting kids from the countryside. The industry just needed a new mine for raw materials.
It's just a supply chain shifting its manufacturing base.
Sure.
But I think the most baffling example of this dynamic is South Korea.
South Korea is a very unique case.
Okay, listener, think about South Korea today. It is a G20 nation. It is a massive economic powerhouse. It produces our smartphones, our cars, our pop music. Furthermore, South Korea is currently suffering from a severe existential demographic crisis. They have one of the lowest birth rates in the entire world.
The government is literally begging people to have babies.
And yet, paradoxically, they remain one of the longest-standing and largest exporters of children for international adoption. Since 1955, they have sent between 166,000 and 200,000 children overseas.
And over 90% of those children come from unwed mothers.
How does that make any economic or logical sense?
It defies all basic economic logic until you understand the deep, systemic, almost insurmountable societal discrimination at play. Since the Korean War, there has been an intense, crushing stigma against single, unwed mothers.
It originally stemmed from the racial bias against mixed-race GI babies born to American soldiers, right?
Yes, but over the decades, it evolved into a fierce cultural rejection of any child born outside of a traditional marriage.
The book notes that unwed mothers are one of the most stigmatized groups in the entire country. If a woman gets pregnant out of wedlock, she is frequently disowned by her parents, fired from her job, and entirely shunned by society.
Yes. And the mechanics of this stigma are built into the legal structure. Because South Korea historically utilized an open family registry system, an employer or a potential landlord could easily pull a woman's documents and see if she had a child out of wedlock.
So the shame is institutionalized.
Exactly. So these women are driven into absolute paralyzing destitution. But here is the critical mechanism that keeps the international adoption pipeline flowing: the devastating financial disparity in government support.
This is the part that proves the system is intentionally rigged to separate families. Let's look at the subsidies. If a single mother in South Korea desperately wants to keep her child, the government provides her with a pathetic, insulting stipend, around $50 to $100 a month.
You cannot survive in Seoul on $50 a month.
But if that same mother relents and relinquishes her child, the government will pay the foster agencies and orphanages caring for that child up to $250 to $1,000 a month until the child is adopted.
It is state-sponsored family separation through fiscal policy.
The government is literally starving the biological mother by denying her a livable welfare stipend, while simultaneously heavily subsidizing the middlemen and institutions who take her child away.
And this pattern repeats globally. The adoption market flows toward high vulnerability and weak regulations, turning poverty and social stigma into a highly profitable, steady supply of children.
Which brings us to the absolute darkest part of this whole equation. We've talked about the supply chain, we've talked about the coercion, but what happens to the end product?
That's the part no one wants to talk about.
We love the narrative of the rescue. We love the photos at the airport. But what happens when the rescue fails? What happens when you take a child with deep, profound trauma who has been ripped from their culture and place them in a suburban American home that is completely unequipped to handle them?
The cultural narrative of adoption almost always ends at the airport. Happily ever after, fade to black. But the psychological reality is that adoption is inherently built on a foundation of trauma. The trauma of a child losing their biological family, losing their culture, losing their native language.
Right. And when you compound that with the trauma of surviving a war or surviving extreme poverty and institutionalization, the behavioral issues can be immense. The book dives deeply into the post-war adoption boom in Liberia. This was heavily promoted by certain conservative Christian magazines groups promoting traditional virtues.
They framed Liberian adoptions as being cheap, easy, and fast. You could get a child for $3,000 to $6,000.
So you had this rush of well-meaning, deeply religious, but utterly naive American families adopting older children who had just survived one of the most brutal, horrific civil wars in modern African history.
You are taking children who have seen atrocities, who perhaps had to fight for food, and dropping them into an American suburb with parents who expect instant gratitude and compliance.
And the tragic result is a phenomenon known as disruption.
Yes, disruption is the clinical sanitized industry term for when an adoption completely fails. It is when the adoptive family decides they can no longer handle the child and they legally dissolve the adoption.
The child literally gets treated like a defective product being returned to the store because it didn't work as advertised.
It is an agonizing reality. Studies show that overall, about 6 to 11% of adoptions in the U.S. disrupt. But when you look at the adoption of older children and teens, that disruption rate skyrockets to a staggering 25%.
1 in 4 older kids are sent away.
And because there is virtually no federal oversight once an internationally adopted child arrives in the U.S., the solutions these desperate, overwhelmed families turn to are chilling.
This part of the book literally made my stomach turn. Parents are essentially rehoming these children on internet message boards. Just posting a profile in a Yahoo group or a Facebook group saying, "We can't handle this 10-year-old boy from Liberia. He acts out. Who wants him?"
They are handing a highly vulnerable, traumatized child over to total strangers on the internet.
And legally, they do this by just signing a simple power of attorney document, completely bypassing the courts, child protective services, and background checks.
This underground rehoming network has resulted in children being handed directly to pedophiles and abusers, completely off the grid.
It's horrific.
Or, if they don't rehome them informally, parents send them to private, unregulated lockdown facilities. The author highlights places like the Ranch for Kids in Montana.
And these facilities charge exorbitant tuition. $3,500 a month or more.
Exactly. And the justification used by these facilities and some parents is often a controversial diagnosis called reactive attachment disorder, or RAD.
What exactly is that?
While RAD is a real, rare condition, it has been co-opted by a fringe element of the adoption community as a catch-all excuse for any bad behavior. Parents are told that because the child has RAD, the child is incapable of love and is deliberately trying to destroy the family.
So they use a medical diagnosis to blame the child.
Yes, and this pseudopsychology is then used to justify horrific abuse. Children are subjected to attachment therapy, which involves food restriction, being pinned to the floor for hours to force eye contact, and in several tragic cases, children have been literally crushed or suffocated to death during these therapy sessions.
And how do these parents pay for these $3,500 a month torture camps? They go back to the internet and crowdfund. They set up donation pages claiming they are battling for their daughter's heart or fighting a spiritual war to save her soul from her trauma, all while they have essentially institutionalized the child yet again.
The child went from an orphanage in Africa to a lockdown camp in Montana.
And you might ask, why don't the original adoption agencies step in to help? Why don't they take responsibility?
Because of a massive legal loophole. Under the U.S. Inter-Country Adoption Act of 2000, American adoption agencies are explicitly granted legal immunity. They do not have to assume liability for the fraud, the kidnapping, or the failures of their foreign partners. Once the child is in America, the agency's legal and financial responsibility is completely severed. They wash their hands of it.
It highlights the ultimate failure of the rescue narrative. When the primary goal is just extraction, getting the child out of the poor country as fast as possible to satisfy a paying customer, there is a profound lack of responsibility for the lifelong, agonizing reality of raising a deeply scarred human being.
The child pays the ultimate price for the adult's savior complex.
Okay. We've gone down a very dark, very heavy path today. Is there a fix? Is there any way to actually solve an orphan crisis without feeding this monster of an industry? Because one country, which experienced unimaginable trauma, actually stood up to this entire machine.
Yes. Rwanda's approach is a radical and deeply inspiring counter-narrative to everything we have discussed.
Tell me about Rwanda.
In 1994, Rwanda suffered one of the most horrific, rapid genocides in modern history. Nearly 1 million people killed in 100 days. The aftermath left the country with 500,000 true traumatized orphans and over 100 orphanages packed to the brim.
It was the textbook definition of a crisis ripe for an international adoption boom. Every agency in the West was waiting at the border with their checkbooks, ready to swoop in and, quote-unquote, save the children of Rwanda.
Exactly. But the Rwandan government looked at the situation, they looked at the history of what happens when Western agencies take over, they looked at the money on the table, and they made a profound sovereign decision.
What did they say?
They looked the West in the eye and said, no, we do not sell our babies.
I love that. Instead of opening the floodgates to foreign adoption, they did the exact opposite. They launched a fierce national campaign of deinstitutionalization.
What's fascinating here is how methodical they were. Instead of viewing orphanages as the solution to their crisis, they viewed orphanages as a toxic problem that perpetuates trauma.
Right, because kids need families, not facilities.
They realized that institutionalizing a child damages their development, and exporting them overseas strips the wounded nation of its very future. So they actively began shutting the orphanages down.
The numbers are incredible. From 100 orphanages and 500,000 kids in the 90s, by 2012, there were only about 3,000 children left in institutions. They closed a third of all orphanages in a massive sweep.
They focused all of their resources, both state funds and foreign aid, entirely on family preservation. They hired massive teams of social workers to literally walk from village to village to trace extended family networks.
And when they found an aunt or a grandmother, they didn't just dump the kid there, right?
No, they provided microgrants. They bought the family a goat, or paid for health insurance, or covered the child's school fees so that the local community member could actually afford to take the child in. Through this, they returned 75% of institutionalized children to their own families.
And the Western adoption agencies hated it. The book details how much pushback Rwanda received from eager adoptive parents and agencies who were just furious, writing angry letters, demanding access to these children, claiming Rwanda was denying kids a better life in America.
Because Rwanda proved the entire industry wrong. They proved that the ultimate solution to an orphan crisis is not chartering private planes and flying children across the ocean to wealthy strangers.
Right.
The solution is eradicating the orphanages themselves, addressing the root causes of poverty, and giving the local families the resources they need to stay together.
Okay, let's wrap this up. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, and I want to be absolutely clear. Adoption, on an individual level, can undoubtedly be a beautiful way to build a family. There are incredible, loving, trauma-informed adoptive families out there who do amazing work.
Absolutely.
But what Kathryn Joyce's book reveals is that the macro industry of adoption is profoundly broken.
It is an industry fueled by massive financial incentives, unchecked religious fervor, and a savior complex that too often morphs into a mechanism of extraction.
It treats single mothers and poor families not as human beings in need of support, but as the raw supply side of a global market.
It is a system that repeats the oldest historical patterns of the wealthy, extracting resources from the vulnerable, just wrapped in the sanitized language of charity.
So as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought, a question to carry with you. Think about the pure economics of this. Think about the $30,000 to $50,000 it costs an American family to adopt a child internationally.
It's a huge sum of money.
If we took that exact same amount of money, and instead of paying American agency directors and lawyers and facilitators and foreign child finders, what if we simply gave that money directly to the struggling birth mother in Haiti or Ethiopia or South Korea?
With that kind of capital, an Ethiopian mother could buy a home, secure stable food for a decade, and pay for all of her children to attend university.
Exactly. If we just gave her the money, would that child even need to be adopted in the first place? When we write these massive checks to agencies, are we actually funding the rescue of orphans? Or are we just funding the disruption of families?